Welcome, everyone, to the third installment in my series of talks called Esoteric Easter. And this is Easter 2018, and we're right on the cusp of Easter weekend here in the middle of Holy Week. And this is Holy Thursday for everyone listening, except if you're in the Eastern Orthodox tradition, it's next week is Holy Week. Anyway, I wish you all a wonderful Easter weekend, and to help you launch you into it, this short presentation will cover very important events in the history of humankind and, of course, in the life of Jesus and his apostles, disciples, covering really a vast amount of pages in the Urantia book, 50, 60 pages, whereas in the Bible you have 3 or 4 or 5 pages of coverage. So this is more than 10 times what we get in the Bible. And again, no casting of aspersions to the Bible, because as you study this over time, you get to appreciate the Bible more than ever, as I said last time, because it just seems like a miracle that they got down on their scrolls so much, which we have confirmed in the Urantia book, and many times close to the same sentences and phrases. And we know that the authors, the revelators, as we call them, of the Urantia book, used and liberally borrowed from the Bible in a way to kind of affirm the Bible's authenticity and in many cases its accuracy in depicting these events and depicting the words of and presenting the words of Jesus. So many of the things you read in the Bible, especially in John, it seems, the Gospel of John, are ratified by all of these papers in the Urantia book. So it profits you to read the biblical version, especially get a condensed version of this and not a 60-page version. And you can be assured that you're getting kind of the gist of this story and many of the most important speeches and teachings of Jesus. And the sort of the most memorable events, such as the foot washing ceremony and the Last Supper. So do read your Bible and read it along, if you can make the time, with the Urantia book, and you will be thrilled. Because as many of you know, the Urantia book is giving you a more full presentation, and it's offering a commentary in the light of 20 centuries of development of what this all means. And so this is in some cases a kind of an analysis of these events, these teachings for us today, that would not have been, would not have worked for the folks back in ancient Palestine, but it's definitely needful for us today to understand things such as what was really meant in the Last Supper by "This is my body, this is my blood," which actually Jesus did not say, but what is meant by that final sacramental ceremony, for example, was very important and central to Catholic and Catholic observance and other churches, other branches of Christianity as well. So we get a kind of authoritative comments by the authors of these papers, who are this group of celestial beings known as midwayers, and a team of writers who authored this to instruct us and to lead us further and deeper into the meaning of the gospel of the heavenly kingdom, so that we can practice this in our time and in ways that are adaptive to the needs of our generation. In fact, we find language here where they use sort of evolutionary terminology, from evolutionary theory, where Jesus is stating, or they're explaining what Jesus is saying, No, I think Jesus is actually saying that we expect adaptive development in the teachings. That is to say, in each generation, we're going to adapt to the evolutionary requirements on the ground where we are, and it depicts Jesus as saying such things that one would only say in the 20th or 21st century, when evolution through adaptation was understood. And so we once again confront the fact that the Urantia book is adding a layer of language and meaning to what would have been said by Jesus. And so there's an enhancement of his teaching, his original literal teaching. There's a little bit of an enhancement going on here, where we are being they're bumping up the meanings and adding modern phraseology for our sake, and obviously with the approval of Christ Michael, as we call him in the Urantia movement. The Urantia book is known as Jesus Christ, but also the title of Christ Michael. So we can assume and be assured that Michael, as we call him, approved of this relanguaging of his final teachings. So in this section, we're picking up with paper 175, where Jesus is in his final discourse in Jerusalem on the Tuesday of the final week, and he's held everybody riveted for a day and a half in the temple precincts, and everybody's thousands of pilgrims are there, and all of the leaders of Jewry are there, witnessing these incredibly dramatic moments and high teachings that he's giving. And then it concludes with this paper 175, where we read of his final discourse there, where he's denouncing ruthlessly the Jewish leaders. And the only thing I can say about this is it reminds me of what's being passed around for years on the internet, which is a list of the best insults that Shakespeare ever wrote, collected from all of his plays. You ever seen that list of verbose and clever insults of Shakespeare's, put in the mouths of characters of Shakespeare? Well, that's what this sounds like to me. I mean, this is a poetic and loquacious, almost literary, insults, and uses all kinds of language to denounce these people, including calling them awful things, murderers, and that they are planning to kill in order to preserve their positions of authority. And it just goes on, and it's just really startling to me, even after studying this my whole life, how bold this is, and certain to provoke, really to polarize the situation for a strategic reason, which is to bring forward everybody's character, to kind of get on record, everyone on record as to what's truly in their heart, and for the apostles, for the disciples, for the people of Jerusalem, the pilgrims, but also obviously for the rulers to, let's get on with it and, to take your stand. So, this is what true leaders do, is they call you to account, to really come forward with what you're thinking in your heart. So there's a time for that, and Jesus didn't go around polarizing things all the time, not even close, and that was never his method. But there were times that it would be justifiable to, dramatically appeal to the deepest self of the hearers, that those that were there with him, to come forward with their truth. And of course, he is the truth. He's the living truth. So, imagine that, the personified truth and the in person, the Son of the Father is in person in front of you. So just by virtue of his presence, all comes forth that needs to. So that's what this denunciation is doing, and I think we need to see it that way rather than a Shakespearean drama, which is done sort of for the sake of a dramatic effect. It's being done for a much deeper reason, which is a spiritual effect, spiritual growth, ultimately. And sometimes with spiritual growth, one must prune the dead leaves from the vine, so to speak. And he's now pruning the nation of Israel of its leadership by stating the truth about them, which is the treachery of the fact that not only are they about to kill him, but they've killed the prophets before him, or they have exiled the great prophets. And he does very, very definitely allude to how they did that. In fact, he cites the case of Zechariah, I think it is, who was killed right in the temple precincts. And they're about to do the same folly again. So he's hearkening back all the way back to the tradition which he instituted on earth when Melchizedek was sent to incarnate. We learn in the Urantia book, who then initiated Abraham, and Abraham was the founder of the Hebrew people, and then we go through a 2,000-year history through the beginning of the nation, then its exile in Egypt, Moses leading them back into Palestine, then their exile in Babylon, then they return. So there's all these different stages, but all along they had scripture, they had prophets, they had important traditions and symbols, and all of this was happening only for one reason, which was to bring to our planet Urantia a bestowal sun, as we call it in the Urantia book. So the bestowal sun is this great visitation, and one must create a way or path for him to be received, a community for him to receive him as a child, to be born, to be incarnate. And so they had to cultivate this nation and this people and this monotheistic system, which really didn't exist anywhere in the world. A true monotheism wasn't anywhere in the world, not really in China or India or Egypt, although there were some rudiments of that. But it was especially the Hebrews who were the holders of the torch of monotheism. So Jesus came to that people, and now they're about to kill him. So in this final denunciation, paper 175, we see the consequence, the dramatic fruition of this incredible history. It's a religious history that is culminating in this week, and of course in the crucifixion and resurrection. But this is these intervening days now that we'll cover here for just a few minutes, so that you can be inspired to read it on your own over Easter weekend, hopefully. And I'm not even going to get up to the crucifixion, but the preface to that today. So let's look over it briefly and try to gain some inspiration. I've provided for you also, you'll note, a study sheet, as I always do, and this one has the best, really just the best quotes from this incredible section and I've highlighted the very best of the best quotes for your study, and some of this stuff is absolutely astonishingly profound. So they've returned now from the denunciation, leaving everybody speechless at the temple, and they return back to their camp on Mount Olivet. And they're camped there with, of course, the apostles, but also the leading disciples are there. And so a number of things happen in this intervening time. where Jesus provides them with important teachings that are meant for them. And, most notably is to explain to them what's about to happen so that they're ready for the dramatic events to come, and his apprehension, his death. And he's really concerned that they don't perish in these events to come, and that they remain safe and able to carry on after his death. And so he's explaining to them, for example, what's going to happen to the Jews, and he explains in detail, how they forfeited their charter. And it's now over, and there's no reason anymore for the divine protection of this nation, which they had enjoyed for centuries. So they're now just individuals. There's no longer a nation that is sanctioned on high, and it will have its inevitable end, which is indeed because this nation did not accept the true Messiah, which is a spiritual Messiah. They were looking for a material deliverer, and so were also the apostles. The whole nation was material-minded. Of course, they had a reason to want to be delivered from the yoke of the Romans, and that can be understood. But they had a reductionist, materialistic view of their own teachings, and the scriptures were not really understood by them, by the leaders at that time. They were minded to, turn Jesus into a political Messiah. So because they never embraced anything more than that, they had again lost their way, and there was no purpose in upholding this nation. So then they would just be at the mercy of the tides of history. And of course, they were under the yoke of the Romans, and if they were to embrace nothing other than a material deliverance and to become this great nation that would lead the world in a material political sense, then they would for sure polarize the Romans, who would take them off the map. So in a couple of generations, this is what did happen, of course, to Jerusalem and to the nation. They were scattered, to the four winds. Jesus is taking pains to tell the apostles that this day will come, and he doesn't want them to perish in this big battle with the Romans, which is now inevitable. So he's explaining that, and on top of that, he's needing to tell them and reassure them that big things will happen spiritually. Chief of which he will return, and secondly, that a new teacher will be sent in his place. That's of course the teacher of Pentecost. That's the Comforter, called the Spirit of Truth. The Spirit of Truth will be sent in his place, and one day he will return. But what happens here is that the apostles, once again get confused and really scramble things and get a convoluted understanding, even though Jesus took great pains in this day and a half period to explain that that his return has nothing to do, with the fall of Jerusalem. But they believe it does, and so that later it's in this myth is kind of concocted and dropped into the Bible, into Matthew, Mark, and Luke, not really in John, Gospel of John, and it's a fabrication, and it's certainly not what Jesus said. So what we have here with the Urantia book is this incredible document, which is a correction to the mistakes of history, the mistakes of Christianity. So it's sort of like the professor is coming back in the room and to do, to examine the students, and finds that they haven't, they're all failing their test, or they're quite confused, and so he's once again explaining the real meaning and the truth of these matters, and that's a function of the Urantia book. But it's much more than a professor. This is divine mercy being visited upon us in this text to explain the the unwitting errors of Christianity, and really the hopes and dreams of real people that are understandable, and which in certain ways are, I find, endearing, that they love him so much and they have so much dependence on him, which is a good thing, that they're like, oh, you're going to come back, we just know it, you're going to come, so they're imagining and projecting these things out of love, really out of love, but other motives as well. So Jesus, we're setting the record straight here with the Urantia book. He is going to come back. No one knows when he's going to come back. It certainly has nothing to do with the fall of Jerusalem. And so there were great disappointments to come, because every generation after that, including our generation, thinks he's coming to us. He's coming to, we're the ones he's going to grace with his second coming. And we get very strong, admonitions in these papers, 176 and 7 and 8, that Jesus, his return is independent of anything on the ground, any of these sorts of things. But it does have to do with the councils of paradise and what they think is best for our evolution. And we don't know what that is, nor do the authors of the Urantia book know when this will be, but they know that he will come in glory. He'll be known to the whole planet when he comes. And so it'd have to be pretty advanced here on Urantia for him to return. So let's put that aside and talk about some of the other things that go on in these papers. As you know, this is the story here, paper 178 and 9 of the Last Supper and the last teachings to the apostles. But just prior to that is something that's not in the Bible, which is the Wednesday of Holy Week, of this week, when Jesus assigned everybody to rest. Now, this is a very interesting thing that you don't get in the Bible. And they had a day of rest on Wednesdays because they had their Sabbath on the weekend, but they worked hard, and then in the middle of the week they rested. And this is because, Jesus is encouraging contemplative practice. He wants people to rest sufficiently to collect their minds and recollect the teachings and the events. He doesn't want to hurry them and rush them, from one thing to the other, the way we live today. They have some time to just sit and rest and pray and watch and gather their thoughts and feelings. So that's what that day, the Wednesday, is for. And Jesus himself is not exactly resting, but he's taking a break from the multitudes, from his followers, and he's going up on a mountain by himself. It's amazing to imagine. And so everybody's just like, oh my God, he's like going to go up this mountain and leave us. Plus, he's being sought by the bad guys, and we've got to send protection for him. And he says, look, no one needs to protect me. I'm the Son of Man, and I want to be alone. But what happens? He's about to depart from the camp, and it's not in the Bible, but a 9-year-old who's an assistant to the apostles named John Mark hands him a basket of food to take with him for his day of prayer, and doesn't let go of the handle on the basket. He doesn't let Jesus go without him. And this 9-year-old says, I'm going to go with you. I don't care. I'm going to want to go with you. And because of his great desire to be with Jesus, who had really planned to be alone, he takes John Mark with him. And this is an incredible scene because Jesus, and it's a theological teaching, really, which is whoever asks for the attention of Christ is going to get it. I don't care if you're 9 years old. I don't care if it's the last day of Jesus's life on earth, before he's arrested. So it's an incredible scene, and the apostles during the day realized they've really blown it. They should have asked to go with him up the mountain too, but they didn't have the guts to do it. Anyway, Jesus returns, and important teachings occur that you can read in those papers. And So now it's time for them to head down to Jerusalem for the Last Supper. And it turns out that Jesus made an arrangement through John Mark for John Mark's parents to provide the upper chamber in their home in Jerusalem for the Last Supper. So they get down there, they walk down there unnoticed, by the persecutors, and they, in incognito, they enter into this place, and then Jesus is downstairs talking to John Mark's parents, and upstairs the apostles are taking their seats, and they, from the Bible that they have this kind of big altercation because they don't know where they should sit. And that the place of honor would be to the left and to the right of the host. That's by tradition. And so what you don't get in the Bible, I don't think, is that Judas seized the best seat, the seat of honor to the left of where Jesus would have sat in this chamber. And it was a provocation to everybody else. And secondly, what you're supposed to do in a household like this is wash your feet. So there's these foot washing stools and water and towels by the door, and none of them have the service-minded attitude that Jesus says you should have, which would, you should wash each other's feet, but they don't do that either. So they're a total mess. And so they take these seats, and John takes the seat to the right hand. He thinks he's important enough to do that. So then Peter takes the seat at the bottom of the circle, and they're arguing when Jesus walks in, and the scene. This is the foot washing scene where Jesus, and it's depicted beautifully in the Bible, washes their feet. Peter protests that he shouldn't do this. Jesus insists on it, and then he gives the teaching that the greatest among you should be the servant of all. And so this is amplified in the Urantia book, and what he really means by this. So he means by this that you should, and I'll just kind of add on to this some teachings that come after this, which is that you should be manifesting the fruits of the Spirit. You should not only just be saved, like one-shot survival. You should continue to bear fruit. You should continue to be the servant of others. And that is the teaching, and that is the gospel. But it's not meant to be understood as that's your duty, that this is a law, that you have to do this regardless of how you feel. Because they make clear in the Urantia book, and they certainly broach in the Bible, that this is done out of love. It's done out of affection. And it's done from the standpoint of seeing others as your friends, the people you love, and you're serving them because of your affection. And secondly, you're dwelling within you is the Spirit of the Father, and through your communion, through your meditation, through your prayerful worship, welling up in you is this energy of love that you bestow on others. So that's the foot washing ceremony, points us to that. And that continues to be the theme at the Last Supper and in his final teachings in these papers. And so it's worth stating again that he's not imposing a new duty on you. It is called a commandment. It's his great commandment. This is the great commandment to love others, not just as brother and sister, but love others as Jesus loved them. And to love at this higher level is called not just a brotherly or sisterly love or a sibling love, but a fatherly, motherly love, a parental love, that we should have the love that a parent has for a child, which is really looking out for the needs and welfare in the broadest possible way. That's the love that he's commending to the apostles and to us, and which he eloquently describes, I believe it's paper 179 and 180, as the love that that starts with the seed of faith and which blossoms. And this love is not a formula. It's not something that you do in any ceremonial, ritual way. It's always free. It's always spontaneous from the heart. It's not from the mind, where if I love this person, then they'll love me back. It's not a calculating love. It's a spontaneous, liberty-loving devotion, as he calls it. So this notion of that you're free to do this, and the freedom then leads you into a greater pleasure. And he actually uses the word. It's actually more pleasurable to be devoted, so devoted, in fact, that you would lay down your life for your friends. And that passage, which is in the study guide that you can print out, that passage, he says, I'm about to engage in the supreme pleasure of laying down my life for you. And he's calling it a supreme pleasure. He's saying, yes, I'm going to suffer, but this is the greatest joy in the kingdom, is to give all and to lay down your life within the bounds of wisdom. And there are other places here where it talks about to wisely love, to not, engage in virtues that are fanatic or that are over dramatic or, audacious, but love that really hits the mark, that really teaches people the way forward sanely into the joy and the happiness of the kingdom. So with that said, I wish you and bid you happy Easter. Please contemplate these things and meditate on these things over the coming days. And I'll be back to cover the next set of papers coming up. I'm not sure exactly when, because I'll be traveling next week in Los Angeles and doing other things with my book tour for my book, Your Evolving Soul. But I'll get back to you soon, and we're going to cover all the way up through Pentecost and the papers up to paper 195, which is a lot of incredible material in coming talks. In closing, in paper 180, Jesus does introduce the Spirit of Truth, which he will send into the hearts of all mankind, all humankind. And he kind of equates his leaving. It's almost like the necessity for him to leave, because he's only personally present to a small number of souls. Now, if he leaves, goes back to his kingdom in heaven, he will send his Spirit of Truth, which is the truth of the Son. It was sent to our hearts and minds, which is there alongside the fragment of the Father, the fragment of God as Father, Mother, that is sent in our hearts and minds as well. So the Father and the Son now will dwell in us as a Pentecost. So we'll get to that next. So I wish you and your family and friends a lovely Easter, and I'll be back soon. God bless.